North Carolina. It's the state that Donald Trump won in 2020.
Right.
For decades, it's been seen as this jewel in the crown of the modern Republican South.
Absolutely. A stronghold.
The place where the GOP built this formidable, some even said unbreakable, structural advantage.
Mm-hmm.
But the data that's just landed,
Mm-hmm.
it suggests the ground there isn't just shifting. It feels like a full-scale earthquake.
It is an earthquake, and this is what we're talking about. It's a profound, maybe even a terminal rude awakening for MAGA loyalists.
In a state they absolutely cannot afford to lose.
They can't. And the evidence for this, it's overwhelming. We're not talking about, small movements in the polls or a little bit of dissent here and there.
No, this is systemic.
It is. We're discussing a wholesale collapse in approval for the party's standard bearer in a state they completely rely on. That whole narrative of North Carolina as, reliably red, it's being discredited right before our eyes.
Okay, let's hit them with that immediate data punch. Let's look at the numbers, because the most staggering thing is Trump's persistent underwater pattern. His disapproval is it's burying his approval.
It is. It's consistently hovering above that critical 50% line.
And when you say underwater, for a politician, especially a former president, that's not a good place to be.
It's a terrible place to be. It means a majority of the electorate is actively telling pollsters they have a negative view of him. And we've seen this across multiple sources, which is key. It's not one rogue poll.
Right.
The Catawba YouGov survey had his disapproval at 52%.
Okay.
The Harper poll, which is widely cited, had it even a bit higher at 52.8%.
Wow.
And even the Elon poll just recently showed his disapproval climbing up to 50%. This isn't just statistical noise.
No, it's a clear trend. A sustained majority rejection.
Exactly.
So what does that mean in practical terms for the party? Because 53% disapproval isn't just a bad headline for the 6 o'clock news. It's predictive.
Yeah. It's an electoral disaster warning. It really is. Dr. Michael Bitzer, who directs the Center for North Carolina Politics at Catawba College, he connected this pattern directly to classic midterm dynamics.
Even though we're looking ahead to 2026.
Even then, historically, when a key party leader, especially a former president who still has so much influence, has a net negative approval over 50% in a swing state,
the whole ticket suffers.
The whole ticket suffers dramatically in the next election.
Yeah.
It drags down the entire brand. It tells you that whatever enthusiasm is there to turn out the base, it's just not enough to overcome the anxiety and the negative feelings from the middle ground.
So let's unpack that 52.8% figure from the Harper poll. Because the real movement, the thing that decides elections in North Carolina, is with the independents.
Yes.
So who's driving this train of disapproval?
It is the unaffiliated voter.
And that's a huge group in North Carolina.
It's huge, and it's growing. You have this massive block of registered voters who don't identify as Democrat or Republican. And when you look at that poll data, a clear majority, 55% of North Carolina independents disapprove of the former president.
55%.
55. This is the group you have to win. They don't have that built-in partisan loyalty that locks in the base vote on either side.
So they're more susceptible to what's actually happening on the ground.
Exactly. They are highly susceptible to real-world factors, things like economic pain, policy failures, the stuff that actually affects their daily lives.
And when you lose independence by that kind of margin, it's not just about the top of the ticket. It has to filter down.
It filters all the way down. This kind of decisive break among unaffiliated voters, it just amplifies the general anxiety the whole electorate is feeling. They're not just disapproving of one person.
No, they're pessimistic about everything, the entire direction of the country.
The mood of the electorate is dark. It is really dark. And that kind of unease is the perfect environment for major political shifts. That same Harper poll found 55% of North Carolinians believe the U.S. is on the wrong track.
More than half the state.
And that's not an outlier. The Catawba YouGov survey found exactly half of all their respondents, 50%, felt explicitly pessimistic about the nation's future. That is a massive chunk of voters who feel like things are fundamentally broken.
What's interesting, though, is that this pessimism, it doesn't seem to be aimed at just one party. It feels like they're punishing the entire system.
That's a really crucial distinction to make. Voters are they're disgusted with Washington in general.
A plague on both your houses.
Pretty much. We see 53% of North Carolinians disapproving of congressional Republicans. But look, congressional Democrats aren't doing much better. They're only clocking in at 38% approval.
So nobody's happy with anyone.
Nobody is happy. The big takeaway is that independents, the very ones driving the disapproval of Trump, they seem to dislike both parties in Congress. Republicans are a little more underwater, but both are in trouble.
They feel abandoned.
They feel abandoned by a political class that's prioritizing these big structural fights over, solving actual problems.
And this generalized disgust, this brings us to a metric that really signals this earthquake we're talking about, the generic ballot flip for the state legislature. North Carolina, for so long, has been defined by the GOP's near-permanent stranglehold on the General Assembly.
The stranglehold is the right word.
And that generic ballot, which usually tracks national sentiment, almost always favors Republicans there.
Yeah.
But the latest Carolina Journal poll, it shows a sudden, dramatic, and pretty decisive flip.
This is the number that should genuinely terrify the Republican leadership. The poll shows Democrats now leading 47.3% to 43.2%.
That's a 4-point lead.
It's a 4.1 advantage. For North Carolina's state legislative generic ballot, that is monumental. It's huge.
This is a state where elections are won and lost on razor-thin margins, where they tilt distinctly red. A 4-point lead for the minority party. That signals a really significant underlying shift in how voters are feeling and who is motivated to turn out.
So tell us what that means, immediately. For the GOP's power structure in Raleigh, what's the immediate implication?
The implication is immediate and it's profound. Their supermajority status in the state legislature is now actively at risk.
And with that goes the veto-proof majority.
Exactly. If this margin holds, or even if it narrows a little, they lose the ability to override a Democratic governor's veto on major legislation without getting some Democratic votes.
Which changes everything.
It changes the entire game. The General Assembly of North Carolina controls voting laws, budget decisions, major tax policies, social legislation, everything. Losing that supermajority forces the GOP to either compromise, which, let's be honest, they are institutionally resistant to doing,
or they face having their entire legislative agenda just stopped cold by the governor. This one poll flips the whole political calculus for the next legislative session.
And this all comes down to a small but incredibly powerful group of voters. We're talking about almost 1 million swing voters who are suddenly activated and on the move.
You have to focus on the scale of this group. It's pivotal. North Carolina's presidential race in 2020, Trump won by only about 74,000 votes.
A tiny margin.
A tiny margin. Now we're tracking nearly 1 million swing voters, 925,000 to be precise. That's about 18% of the entire registered electorate.
Wow.
Their alignment will decide the fate of every candidate from the state house all the way up to the U.S. Senate. And here's the kicker. 75% of them are independents. This is the pool where that 4.1 generic ballot shift is coming from.
So what do these nearly 1 million voters actually care about? What is it that moves their ballot?
Their priorities are a direct rebuke to the current political climate. The data shows these swing voters prioritize 3 things significantly higher than the average voter in North Carolina.
What are they?
Bipartisanship, government spending, and education policies.
Bipartisanship.
Yes. So when you have a party, the GOP, that has been engaging in these highly partisan structural manipulations and pushing extreme policies, which we'll get to in a minute,
They are actively pushing away the very voters they need.
they're fundamentally alienating the very voters who could give them a durable majority. The swing voter wants competence and consensus. What they're getting is confrontation and chaos.
And that word, confrontation, leads us right to the next point. The hyper-partisan strategy that's become synonymous with the current Republican power structure. I'm talking about gerrymandering. This isn't just some abstract political fight anymore. The sources detail these explicit attempts by GOP leaders to manipulate the district maps, and they're connecting it directly to their national strategy.
It's an open mission statement at this point. It's a public acknowledgement that they believe structural power is more important than democracy. Republican leaders have openly stated they were acting on instructions from the former president and his allies to redraw maps for one specific purpose.
To maintain control of the U.S. House.
To maintain control of the U.S. House into 2026 and beyond. The whole rationale is based on this flawed idea, this mandate myth, the idea that because Trump won the state by a narrow margin, they have a mandate to maximize their partisan advantage, regardless of how the voters are actually distributed.
So explain for the listener, what is the sheer consequence of this power grab? How does this map manipulation translate into actual representation?
The shift is massive, and it's really easy to quantify. North Carolina's U.S. House delegation, it was designed to be relatively balanced. After the 2022 elections, it was a 7-7 split.
Evenly divided.
Evenly divided. Now it's set to shift drastically to a 10-4 GOP split for the 2024 cycle.
So they gained 3 seats.
They gained 3 seats purely through redrawing the lines, not by winning over a single new voter. And they're not even stopping there. Republican leaders are already targeting the last remaining swing district, CD1, which tells you they're going to keep pushing for every possible advantage they can get.
This sounds like the complete opposite of what those 925,000 swing voters, who you said prioritize bipartisanship, actually want.
It's a massive failure of political leadership. The party is prioritizing its own self-preservation and structural power over the clearly expressed will of their own constituents.
And it's not just liberals who are angry about this.
No, not at all. The disapproval crosses party lines in a big way. New polling found that an astonishing 84% of North Carolina voters say gerrymandering is never acceptable.
84%.
And crucially, that number includes 78% of registered Republicans.
Even their own base hates it.
And 85% of unaffiliated voters. The public consensus is crystal clear. Voters want courts or bipartisan commissions to draw the maps, not politicians.
So you have a situation where the political leadership is publicly chasing a strategy that 84% of the population, including most of their own base, fundamentally rejects.
Yes.
That level of disconnect between the leaders and the constituents has to feed directly back into those high disapproval ratings we started with.
Absolutely. When voters see their leaders focusing on manipulating boundaries instead of, delivering economic relief or efficient government, it just confirms that pessimism we saw. It confirms their belief that the country is on the wrong track.
Right.
This perception of undermining fair elections while the public is watching and overwhelmingly disapproves, it creates a toxic environment for the entire GOP brand. It links them to incompetence and, frankly, authoritarian overreach.
We've established the political environment is toxic. It's characterized by this deep disapproval and structural manipulation. But the root cause of so much of this dissatisfaction is a lot more tangible. It's economic anxiety. Let's pivot to the kitchen table issues that are fundamentally moving the ballot box away from the party in power. North Carolinians are feeling a serious pinch.
They are, and the anxiety is palpable. The Elon University poll tried to quantify this economic pessimism. They asked people to give grades.
Like in school, A, B, C.
Exactly. An overwhelming 76% of North Carolinians gave the national economy a grade of C, D, or F.
3 out of 4 people.
3 out of 4 people believe the national economy is mediocre or just failing. And 70% gave their own state economy a C or lower. This isn't just about partisan talking points. This is a signal of real, persistent financial insecurity that cuts across all demographics.
And the sources break down exactly what they're worried about. When you ask voters to reflect on the current administration's time in office, they feel like conditions have gotten worse.
We do.
Nearly half, 39%, said the national economy has worsened. 53% said inflation worsened. And a flat 50% said the job market has gotten worse.
And all of that translates directly into personal insecurity, which is the most politically volatile ingredient you can have. Here's the damning figure. 44% of respondents are less confident in their personal financial situation compared to just a year ago.
Almost half the electorate feels less secure.
And when nearly half the electorate feels less financially secure, they're actively looking for someone to blame. And the party in power, well, it often bears the brunt of that anger. The core populist promise, the idea that the movement would deliver economic liberation, it is failing the lived reality test for a huge portion of the North Carolina population.
And nowhere is that broken promise clearer than with the tariffs. That was a signature economic policy of the populist right.
It was.
The tariffs are a perfect example of a policy hitting the pocketbook and hitting it hard.
Indeed. The Carolina Journal poll showed just an overwhelming negative perception of them. 55.8% of North Carolina voters believe tariffs are actively hurting their family's financial situation.
Hurting them.
Hurting. Only 19.1% believe they're helpful. That's nearly 3 times as many people seeing negative impacts as positive ones. And this is critical because, tariffs are often framed as this tool to punish foreign competitors and protect American jobs.
But that's not how people are experiencing it.
No. The reality is they function as a hidden tax on consumers and on businesses that have to rely on imported goods or materials.
Let's quantify the real-world cost here, because the $1,700 figure is jarring.
It's highly meaningful, especially for working families in North Carolina. The estimates show tariffs are increasing median household costs in the state by about $1,700 a year. Annually. For a household that's already struggling with high gas prices and elevated grocery costs, which is what's driving all that anxiety we just talked about, an unearned mandatory cost of $1,700 is significant.
That's a huge deal. That could be months of car payments.
It could be a year of utility bills for some families. It could be the difference between making rent and falling behind. It directly undermines the financial confidence of the very voters who are told these policies would make them rich.
And we have the heartbreaking, real-world casualty of this policy in the sources. The story of Wilson Jones.
Yes.
A fifth-generation lumber business owner in North Carolina.
The story of Wilson Jones it's the profound irony of the populist movement in a microcosm. He was a loyal Trump voter.
He voted for him.
But his family business, a multi-generational established American enterprise, was forced to shut down, directly because of the cost and complexity of the tariffs on lumber imports and exports. Imagine that, building a legacy for 5 generations.
Only to have a policy that's supposed to protect American industry be the very thing that kills it.
It's devastating.
And his quote, it was spoken with so much sarcasm, it's brutal.
Yeah.
He spoke of feeling liberated from our business.
That phrase just drips with the sense of betrayal. A core supporter whose loyalty was repaid with financial ruin. This is the populist economic agenda, turning on its own most loyal base.
It fundamentally violates the social contract of the entire movement.
It does. And this failure to protect and uplift the working class, it brings us to the deeper and frankly scarier policy framework the party is now associated with.
Project 2025.
The policies of Project 2025, which should absolutely terrify the very working class voters whose businesses are already being shuttered by tariffs.
Project 2025 is being presented as the policy blueprint for the next administration. And the points outlined in it, they seem almost explicitly designed to hurt the MAGA base, particularly non-college graduates and people who rely on the social safety net.
Let's get into the specifics because they are generating so much concern.
Please.
The manifesto, which was compiled by the Heritage Foundation, it outlines a systematic dismantling of the social safety net that working class Americans depend on. We are talking about concrete and some would say cruel policy points. This includes massive budget cuts for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
The 3 pillars.
The 3 pillars of financial and health stability for millions of older and lower income voters. Beyond that, it proposes eliminating food stamps, the SNAP benefits for anyone who isn't working or actively looking for a job.
And housing.
It would make affordable housing and healthcare fundamentally harder to obtain through all sorts of regulatory rollbacks.
And the cruel irony here is the demographic breakdown. Who uses these services the most?
Lower income, less educated Americans. The sources explicitly state that Project 2025 would disproportionately harm non-college graduates.
And if you look at the core of the former president's support,
roughly 70% of his voters are non-college graduates. So the policies, like the stated intent to gut Medicaid, are in direct, brutal contradiction with the populist rhetoric of fighting for the forgotten man and woman.
It's an elite policy agenda dressed up in populist language.
That's a perfect way to put it.
But the former president, he has publicly distanced himself from the plan. He said it's not his official platform. Does that even matter if the entire policy infrastructure around him is dedicated to implementing it?
It matters very little to informed voters, especially those who are tracking political intent. A CNN review found that at least 140 former Trump administration officials,
140,
including 6 former cabinet secretaries, were deeply involved in writing this massive 900-page manifesto from the Heritage Foundation.
So the people are the policy.
The people are the policy. Voters are now forced to reckon with the reality that the entire political and intellectual infrastructure surrounding the MAGA movement intends to dismantle the very safety net they rely on. The loyalty is to the leader, but the policy delivery mechanism is aiming a wrecking ball at the economic stability of his base.
So the economic backlash isn't just about current inflation or tariffs. It's about the fear of an intentional dismantling of their safety net, all orchestrated by the party they're loyal to. That's a powerful driver of that wrong track sentiment.
And when you combine that profound economic anxiety with a kind of generalized governmental incompetence, you get the political crisis we are seeing in North Carolina.
To humanitarian failures.
The sources detail instances of what can only be called humanitarian failures, and they're leading to intense, widespread anger. Let's start with the slow, disastrous federal response to Hurricane Helene in western North Carolina.
This was a major, devastating storm, and the federal response was deeply criticized. What does the data show about how voters perceived that response, especially among the GOP base?
The disapproval is striking, and it is explicitly bipartisan. A year after Helene hit, 54% of North Carolinians disapprove of the federal government's handling of the recovery efforts.
Okay, but here's the political kicker, right?
Here it is. This disapproval includes 50% of those who recalled voting for Trump.
Half of his own voters.
Half of the core Republican base is expressing deep dissatisfaction with a response managed by their own administration's appointees. This is a profound failure of basic governmental service.
And the key figure here, someone who's going to become very important later in our discussion, is Michael Whatley. He was Trump's appointed FEMA recovery czar for Western North Carolina. What was the specific criticism of his performance?
Whatley's role was just marred by what local officials described as a trickle of money and a near total lack of visible, proactive outreach to these devastated communities.
So he was absent.
The delayed and denied aid, this slow rolling of necessary funds, was framed by locals as cruel and unusual treatment. You had local residents and officials, many of whom were Republicans, demanding Whatley's resignation.
Why?
They were frustrated that their small counties couldn't even get reimbursed for the initial debris cleanup they did just to keep the roads open. You campaign on fixing the system and delivering for the people, and then you deliver nothing but neglect and bureaucratic frustration to people who have lost everything.
That is a clear failure of competence. But the sources also detail enforcement actions that move beyond incompetence into what a lot of people perceived as outright cruelty. The aggressive, terrorizing immigration enforcement, often called Operation Charlotte's Web.
This was a series of military-style raids led by Border Patrol CBP in North Carolina cities like Charlotte, Durham, Raleigh. The tactics themselves were designed to instill fear.
How so?
Agents went into peaceful, largely Latino communities, local restaurants, factories, construction sites, often without even telling state or city officials they were coming. And they were using military gear and tactics. It just added to the confusion and created this sense of a community under siege.
The pretext for these operations is always the same, right? They're targeting the worst of the worst criminals. Did the data actually support that claim in similar operations?
The evidence strongly suggests it did not. And this is what makes that cruelty charge stick. Similar operations run by the same agencies in other places, for example in Chicago, showed that 97% of those arrested had absolutely no criminal record.
97%.
Which completely undermines the claim of targeting dangerous individuals. The operational reality was the terrorizing of general immigrant communities. It disrupted civil life and the local economy for no good reason.
And the disruption was massive and immediate. It illustrates the cost of this type of cruel and unusual enforcement. Give us the specifics of the fallout in Mecklenburg County.
The social and economic fallout was just immediate and devastating. Fear paralyzed these communities. In Mecklenburg County alone, 56,000 students stayed home from school in just 2 days.
56,000.
That's a massive functional shutdown of the public education system, driven purely by fear. Construction sites, farms, workplaces that rely on immigrant labor, they emptied out. Businesses and workers lost income overnight. The economic impact was profound, and the social fallout meant families were scared to seek basic medical care or even report crimes to the police.
So how did the community respond to try and mitigate this?
The local response really highlights the depth of the crisis. CMRNC, which is a Latino advocacy group, they mobilized thousands of volunteers to train safety patrols. They organized community support. They were actively mapping confirmed sightings of federal agents.
They had to protect themselves.
They described this period as the highest alert situation they had ever faced. It essentially forced community members to step up because they felt abandoned and frankly, victimized by a federal authority.
And if you connect this back to the political perception we talked about earlier, the one about authoritarianism, how does Operation Charlotte's Web feed into that narrative?
It feeds directly into it. The Catawba YouGov survey asked voters if they thought the president's use of the military in cities was seen as the actions of a dictator.
And what did they say?
A majority, 51% of North Carolinians, agreed with that description.
Wow.
And crucially, this belief that the actions bordered on dictatorial was shared by 32% of Republicans.
A third of his own party.
A third. So when policy is perceived as cruel, tactics are perceived as dictatorial, and the result is a breakdown of competence and community trust. That's what drives these high, sustained disapproval ratings across party lines. Voters see a political movement that is willing to break established norms and inflict unnecessary pain just to pursue a political agenda.
So we have a state where the Republican standard bearer is deeply unpopular.
Deeply.
The economic policies are punishing the base, and the humanitarian response has been criticized as cruel and incompetent. All of these structural weaknesses seem to be converging in one place.
The crucial 2026 U.S. Senate race.
Exactly. And the Democratic Party, recognizing this vulnerability, has secured what the sources are calling a dream recruit.
Former Governor Roy Cooper. He is undeniably the political giant in this race. He serves as the primary obstacle to the GOP achieving total dominance in the state, and the polls really reflect his strength.
What are the numbers?
Currently, Cooper is leading the Manatee Republican frontrunner, Michael Whatley, by a significant margin, 8.7 points. Cooper's at 47.3% to Whatley's 38.6%, according to the latest Carolina Journal poll.
That's a big lead.
It's a big lead, and he leads by an even wider margin against another potential GOP candidate.
We've talked a lot about Michael Whatley already. A former RNC chair, state party chair, the criticized FEMA czar. He is the anointed Mangia candidate, yet he's starting almost 9 points behind. Why is that contrast so stark? Why is he struggling so badly to connect?
The fundamental problem for Whatley is a massive name recognition deficit, which I think speaks to a broader failure to translate national party loyalty into local political resonance.
So people just don't know who he is.
A lot of people don't. Cooper is enormously well known because of his long tenure in the state.
Yeah.
75% of North Carolinians have heard a great deal or at least something about him. That comes from his years as Attorney General and 2 terms as governor.
And Whatley?
Whatley, despite his high-profile Republican roles, has a huge visibility problem. The Elon poll found that 48% of voters have heard nothing at all about him.
Almost half the state.
Almost half. And nearly 3/4 have heard only a little or nothing.
I have to challenge that a little bit. Isn't being the RNC chair a massive advantage in fundraising and organization? How can he have such low name recognition despite that national profile? Are we maybe underestimating the GOP's ability to define him later on when the money really starts to flow?
That's a fair challenge. His RNC role absolutely guarantees he will have massive financial support. This race is projected to be one of the most expensive in history.
Right.
However, being RNC chair defines a candidate by Washington and by party mechanisms, not by constituent service or local achievement. What the current data suggests is that the independents and swing voters we identified, the ones who care about competence and bipartisanship,
They've only heard the bad stuff.
they've only heard the negative stories about him. His criticized performance as the hurricane czar and his extreme policy positions. The money can try to define him, but it's going to have to overcome these known policy vulnerabilities first.
Speaking of those vulnerabilities, let's nail down the 2 key areas where Whatley has explicitly tied himself to unpopular policy.
First, we go right back to the economic cell phone. His unwavering, explicit support for the tariffs.
He's all in on them.
He wholeheartedly supports the tariffs and has wrongly insisted that these policies have made the people of North Carolina rich. That just flies in the face of the data showing $1,700 in household cost increases and the real-world collapse of businesses like Wilson Jones's lumber company.
It makes him sound completely disconnected.
Completely disconnected from the economic reality of the average person in the state.
And second,
His failure in that critical role of hurricane czar.
the Helene response.
Exactly. His widely criticized performance in the Helene recovery demonstrates a lack of basic competence and empathy during a major crisis. For those swing voters who are looking for a pragmatic, capable leader, Whatley presents as an organizational loyalist who failed the core test of public service during a humanitarian disaster.
And Cooper, in contrast, is running on a template of pragmatic leadership that focuses on actual delivery.
That's the whole campaign.
So let's look at Cooper's governing template, the policy contrast.
Right.
He managed to lead a deeply polarized state. He balanced budgets and got major things done despite having a Republican legislature.
Cooper's entire tenure is defined by consensus building, which is a direct appeal to those 925,000 swing voters who prioritize bipartisanship. His experience as Attorney General from 2000 to 2016 and then 2 terms as governor gives him this massive depth of experience.
But his key achievement, the one that contrasts most sharply with the MAA and Project 2025 agenda, has to be Medicaid expansion.
It was a monumental achievement, politically and practically.
Tell us how significant that was.
It required him to build consensus with a hostile Republican legislature over many, many years. It proves his ability to work across the aisle to deliver tangible benefits. The expansion provided health insurance to 675,000 North Carolinians.
Wow.
Securing health care for working families, for rural citizens, for veterans. This is practical, tangible help. And it positions him perfectly against Project 2025's policy goal of gutting Medicaid. Cooper delivers the safety net that Whatley's policy allies want to dismantle.
Cooper frames the race as a fight for everyday people against the billionaires. He contrasts himself sharply with Whatley, who he describes as the big oil lobbyist and a Washington insider anointed by this president. That sets up a very clear choice for voters.
It sets up a contrast between practical experience and pure loyalty. Cooper is running on a record of delivering healthcare and balanced budgets. Whatley is running on loyalty to a party and a leader whose policies are causing economic harm and structural resentment.
It's a clear message.
Cooper understands the high stakes. He says, Washington is broken. We need people who will go to Washington with practical experience who can break this majority and try to make this Washington work for everyday people instead of the billionaires that's been going on now for too long.
And this intentional shift toward competence and consensus is so crucial, especially because Democrats have only won 2 U.S. Senate races in North Carolina in the last 40 years.
Right.
This requires more than just enthusiasm. It requires a disciplined appeal to the center.
It requires appealing to the exact 925,000 voters who are just tired of partisan warfare. And while Whatley performs a little better with the hard Republican base than his primary opponents, which shows that Makey loyalty is still a powerful primary force.
The primaries are different.
Exactly. Cooper's strategy is designed to pull those moderate and independent voters by focusing relentlessly on those kitchen table issues: healthcare, tariffs, government efficiency, where the MAGA policies have been shown to fail so spectacularly. The policy reality is completely undermining the populist rhetoric.
So the sources we've looked at, they paint this comprehensive picture of a political environment in North Carolina that is just, well, it's rapidly disintegrating beneath the Republican establishment.
It really is.
This rude awakening is driven by a potent mix of factors. First, you have the economic pain.
The tariffs, inflation, and the very real threat of Project 2025 gutting the safety net.
Second, the humanitarian failures. The slow rolling of Hurricane Helene aid and those terrorizing military-style immigration raids that paralyzed entire communities.
And third, the growing perception of authoritarian overreach, fueled by that open hostility toward fair elections through gerrymandering.
And all of these elements, they fatally undermine the core populist promise.
They have. The MAGA movement sold protectionism and anti-establishment anger, but it delivered policies, tariffs that closed fifth-generation small businesses, and massive proposed cuts to healthcare and social programs that disproportionately harmed the very working-class, non-college educated voters who form their most loyal base.
They demanded loyalty.
But they offered cruelty and incompetence in return.
The structural dynamic here is just fascinating. When North Carolina Republicans were polled, over half, 54%, said they supported Donald Trump over the Republican Party itself.
That is a cult of personality replacing institutional loyalty.
It is.
And that 54% number is the core tension defining the modern American right. Given the massive public rejection of gerrymandering, the clear economic harm caused by tariffs, and the threat Project 2025 poses to the working class majority who rely on that safety net, it leaves you with a question.
Which is?
How long can populist loyalty withstand economic reality and political policies widely considered cruel and unusual by a majority of the electorate? What happens to the Republican Party's future in the South if its economic policy continues to consistently punish its own base, forcing those loyal voters to choose between their identity and their survival? That is the question North Carolina is currently forcing the entire nation to confront.